What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome to Lucky Week number 13. Bettors who took yes on me saying Lucky Week 13, yes, in fact, does hit with your local sportsbook. Welcome to Week 13 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2024 CFL season, and we broke even last week. 6-6. I'm okay with that. It's not the wild hot streak that we've been on for the 4 weeks prior, but hey, we'll take even money. Anytime we're not underwater, 2 thumbs up. We'll take that. Was 3-1 straight up. I put together a tidy little straight up season so far, 29-18-1, and 1-3 against the spread, 2-2 on the totals. Means I'm even money for both of those on the season at 24-24. So I remain 11 games above 500, but boy, over the last month, we've really been on like a rocket to the moon. We're just taking a little pit stop. Second straight solid week in CFL fantasy. Kind of, trying to forge a little bit of a comeback there as well. 97.6 points in week 12. Good for just outside the top 600 across the whole game. And inside the top 150 in Derek Taylor's league. On the season, 1,204.2 points. Just barely inside the top 2,000 across the whole game. And 264 in Derek Taylor's league. Now, my most outstanding player was a really interesting conversation for me this past week because I had 5 players who scored at least 12.5 points. So I had balanced scoring across the vast majority of my roster. I'm going to give it to Walter Fletcher because Walter Fletcher had the highest base score among my entire roster. Brady Oliveira gave me almost 28 points, but he had the 2 times captain multiplier. So I'm going to give it to Walter Fletcher. He put up a 15.9. It was my highest base score on the season. But just before we get out of CFL fantasy, the game hasn't unlocked yet, so I'll talk about kind of who I'm looking at a little bit later. But it feels like a good point in the season to set some goals. Like, we know where we're at with CFL fantasy. Now it's where do I want to be by the end of the year. So right now, like I say, I'm just inside the top 2,000 overall. By the end of the season, I'd like to be inside the top 1,500. Like, I think that's a reasonable goal to try to attain moving forward. If I had a stretch goal, boy, I'd love to get inside the top 1,000. That's going to be difficult, but if I hit a real hot streak here with fantasy, it's not impossible by any means. So top 1,500 is what I'd like. Top 1,000, big stretch goal. In terms of Derek Taylor's league, which has, I think, it's just under 800 members in it. So where am I? I'm sitting 264. So I'd like to finish the season in that league, let's say inside the top, let's say like 225. Because that's a fairly competitive league. It's the biggest league in CFL fantasy. It's a lot of competition. So if I can finish the season inside the top 225, I'd feel pretty good about that. In terms of a stretch goal, if I get inside, I think it's the top 175, I'm in the top third of the league. So if I could get to there by the end of the season, top 175, nice stretch goal there. That's what we're shooting for. So again, overall, we're looking for top 1,500 and top 225 in Derek Taylor's league as kind of our benchmark. Our stretch goals inside the top 1,000 and inside the top 175. With all that said, let's take a look at our slate of games for the OK Tire Labor Day weekend. Obviously one of the biggest weeks, if not the biggest week, of the CFL regular season. We've got the Ottawa REDBLACKS and the BC Lions playing on neutral ground for Touchdown Pacific in Victoria, BC. So not technically a home game for the Lions, but essentially a home game for the Lions, just not being played at BC Place. We've got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Saskatchewan, as always, taking on the Riders on Labor Day weekend. We've got the Labor Day Classic between the Toronto Argos and the Hamilton Ticats, that game in Hamilton at Tim Hortons Field. And we've got the Edmonton Elks traveling to Calgary to take on the Stamps. In terms of what we saw across the league last week, points were at a premium and the dogs were barking last week. 3 of the 4 games the underdogs covered against the spread, and the only game that wasn't an underdog against the spread cover, was Ottawa favored by a single point. So everything was very, very close. The Dogs certainly performed last week, and 3 of the 4 games finished under the point total. Actually, I think it's been 4 of the last 5, because I think the last game of the previous week also finished as an under. I think we see a few more points this weekend. So let's kick things off with that rematch from last week. This time the RedBlacks traveling to BC. Obviously, like I say, rematch from last week, and Touchdown Pacific taking place on neutral ground, quote unquote, in Victoria. Last week, the RedBlacks used a 22-10 second half run to topple BC, despite the fact that their run D kind of caved in just right immediately after I was talking about how good the RedBlacks run defense, how deadly they've been over the last month or so. They kind of caved in. They allowed 165 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 22 carries to the Lions as a team last week. But at the most important position, that's what won the game. Drew Brown completing 76% of his passes, 390 yards passing, 3 touchdowns and a pick. He outduels Nathan Rourke, who completed 71% of his passes, which is still quite good, 234 yards, still looking for his first touchdown since returning to the CFL, but he did throw a pick for the second straight game. Last week, the RedBlacks did prove themselves much more able to sustain drives, going 64% on second down versus just 45% for the BC Lions. And not only sustain drives, but finish them. 4 offensive touchdowns for the RedBlacks last week. As a comparison, the Lions have 4 offensive touchdowns in their last 4 games. Despite the power outage for the Lions, the run game looked good, looked solid last week, with Nathan Rourke adding that wrinkle to their offense, because Nathan Rourke can take off and run with it. We saw him have a 51-yard run last week, so his mobility from the quarterback position definitely adds a new wrinkle to this Lions offense, and in general, they ran the ball very good last week. But they had 5 trips to the red zone that only amounted to those 2 David Mackey goal line rush touchdowns. It's not going to cut it when your defense is kind of average, which is what the Lions have been lately. All things considered here, I think if you go by the numbers, this might be trending towards a total mismatch in favor of the Ottawa REDBLACKS, especially with the Lions offense playing like all-time bad. In terms of their offensive efficiency right now, if they're as bad as the Elks have gotten through the Chris Jones era, like it's like 21, I believe, is their offensive efficiency metric. So I mean, 21 yards per point put on the board is terrible. From an efficiency perspective, it's awful. But I think I'm going to bite on the revenge angle in this game. Like, look, CFL made a big deal of taking Touchdown Atlantic and moving it to the other coast. They moved it to Victoria. It's essentially a home game for the Lions, just not being played at BC Place. It's a direct rematch. They just lost last week. I'll bite on the revenge angle, and I'll bite on the idea of Nathan Rourke breaking out of his mini funk. Although, depending on the health of Vernon Adams, we might not see Nathan Rourke. As it stands, give me the BC Lions here to get the win at home in Touchdown Pacific over the Ottawa REDBLACKS. On the line, BC is laying -3.5 points. This line was as low as -2.5, which I felt much more comfortable taking. But, I don't love having to buy that extra half point, but such is the nature of Vegas. So I like the Lions to win. I guess I'll bite and lay the -3.5. Total in the game set at 51 points. I do think this total stays under. I see a bit more of a defensive battle this week. And again, with the Lions, from an efficiency perspective, playing so poorly lately, I think the safer play here is the under, where it's a number that's in the 50s. So under 51 points in BC Ottawa. Let's go like a 27-20, something like that. Lions win. Lions cover the -3.5 and give me the under on the points. Let's go to Saski now for this classic Labor Day matchup of Riders and Bombers. On Winnipeg's side, the Bombers nearly regressed to some of their early season outcomes, but they hold on for a 3-point win over Hamilton despite 3 interceptions from Zach Collaros, connecting with Kenny Lawler on a touchdown with 21 seconds left in the game to kind of snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. The Bombers have seen marginal improvement from the quarterback position lately. Their 5 games coming into last week, we saw Zach Collaros put up over 1,500 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, 5 picks. The interception numbers are still looking gnarly coming into last week. But let's be perfectly honest, it's Brady Oliveira and the defense most nights that's driving play here for Winnipeg, and in a lot of cases that's going to be good enough. Brady Oliveira last week, 120 yards rushing on 18 carries, and the defense going 13 for 17 on second down, only allowing 4 conversions on second down last week. Tremendous performance on getting off the field and giving the offense another chance to eventually come back and win that football game. Saskatchewan dropped a heartbreaker last week on a game-winning rouge against the Toronto Argos. The defense definitely deserved better in that game. Certainly, the defensive side deserved better. 4 red zone stops, including 3 that generated turnovers on downs, and a great run defense. They only allowed 54 yards on 20 carries to the Argos last week. The offense just didn't wind up having an answer. And it's crazy to me that the offense didn't have an answer, because has anybody looked at the Riders' wide receiver depth chart lately? I don't think there's any team that can roll out a top 1 through 8 receivers like the Riders can. It's crazy. It wasn't showcased last week, but look at this. Sam Emelis, Dante Myers, who has been, on a hot streak the last 3 weeks or so. Aju, Keyshawn Johnson, Kyan Schaefer-Baker, Sean Bain is still in that room. I haven't even mentioned Mitchell Picton or Jareth Stearns, who has been a really reliable source of receiving yardage over the last year. It just keeps going. Their receiver room is deadly. They've got the quarterback to showcase it. They didn't do it last week. It's going to be tough to do it again this week. Despite last week's admirable showing by the Riders' defense, there is exactly one elite unit in this game, and that is Winnipeg's defensive side. In a game that I think points are going to be at a premium, not to mention the fact that there is a significant rest advantage here, as the Riders will be playing, their 9th consecutive game? 9 straight, and they don't get a bye next week either. So look, this will be the 9th straight game for the Riders. That's a lot of football back to back to back to back to back. I gotta lean on the team with the best defense, which does in fact buck the trend of this game in particular, where Saskatchewan has won 15 of the last 18 matchups on Labor Day weekend. We're bucking that trend. We're going with the Bombers in this one. Let's take Winnipeg in Saskatchewan to get the win over the Riders. On the line, the Riders are laying -2.5 here against the spread as a fairly marginal home favorite. I like Winnipeg to win. Give me the +2.5. Total in the game set at 47.5 points. This game might not reach 40 because, again, it's 2 defenses that have shown good things in the past few weeks. Winnipeg a little more reliably, but still 2 very good defensive units. 2 offensive units that are in the bottom half of the league in terms of efficiency right now. So points at a premium, give me the under. Under 47.5 points in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. Let's go a 23-16 competitive football game. Winnipeg gets the win. Bombers win. Bombers cover +2.5. Under on the points. Finish off the rest of my coffee from an unnamed restaurant because they don't sponsor me. The Battle of the QEW is up next with the Toronto Argos traveling to Hamilton to take on the Ticats. The Argos were on the happy side of that controversial game-winning rouge from last week, and that will almost certainly prompt a rule discussion in the off-season in terms of, that's not really in the spirit of what that rouge rule is supposed to be. So I'm sure that's going to prompt some conversation in the off-season from a rules committee, but Chad Kelly returns, puts up 322 yards in passing, does not have a passing touchdown, did throw a pick, but guided the team to the win. Chad Kelly targeted Tavares Daniels 10 times in that game. Daniels only bringing in 4 of them for 40 yards, but it was DeMonte Coxey who was the biggest beneficiary of that kind of firepower from the quarterback position, catching 5 balls for $112. Notable because Coxey becomes the first Argos receiver this season to go for 100 or more yards in a game. Crazy. Like, that's 12 weeks. They've had one. Coxie is now the Argos leader in catches, yards, and touchdowns. He's got 28 catches, 459 yards, and 2 scores, ranking 22nd league-wide in yardage. This is why it is very important that that quarterback is back under center for that team from an on-the-field perspective. On Hamilton's side, the Ticats dropping 17 points in the third quarter to really make things interesting against the Bombers last week, ultimately falling 26-23. The Ticats are back to Bo Levi Mitchell as Taylor Powell goes to the 6-game injured list. That'll come close to ending his season potentially. I do hope we get to see him a little bit more towards the end of the year. Bo puts up 220 scoreless yards, most of which went to Tim White, which, by the way, welcome back Tim White, 165 all-purpose yards in that game. But like it's been for most of the season, the offense wasn't really the issue here. It's the fact that, like, Hamilton's defense has not had it all season long. At some point, you need to have more than just a pass rush. Now, I want to give the pass rush their flowers. They've got 23 sacks on the season. That is second place in the CFL. Their pass rush has been very good this year, but the defense has consistently been bottom 2 all year long in defensive efficiency, and they're the only defense in the CFL that's giving up more than 30 points a game. Can't win with it. So what's the answer? Hire Chris Jones. Okay. It feels like the anti-Chris Jones show. It's not, but I'm like, why? Anyway, okay. Another big rest advantage here in this game. Like, Toronto, I believe, just came off their bye fairly recently. Hamilton is playing their 7th straight game this week. Plus, look, it's just a wild efficiency mismatch on both sides of the football that should equal an Argos blowout. And the reason why the Argos would kind of want to have a blowout in this game, if you're looking ahead, let's assume Montreal has wrapped up the East Division. They haven't, but let's assume. In terms of the East semifinal, you're looking at, it's going to be Ottawa and Toronto in that context, right? Both of those teams have been wildly good at home this year, fairly mediocre on the road. So that home field advantage is necessary. Like, you need it. So Toronto can't afford to lose a game like this. And I don't think they're going to lose a game like this. Let's take the Argos on the road in Hamilton to beat the Ticats, because again, at this point, Ticats really don't have too much to play for at this point in the season. On the line, Hamilton is taking +5 as a fairly strong home dog, and home dogs have been pretty solid across the whole season, but I mean, you can't trust Hamilton's defense, especially in the fourth quarter. You can't, even if they had a lead, you can't trust them to hold a lead or even cover this number. So if this was like something crazy, like a +9.5, then like maybe you might have to look at it. But I mean, -5, I think Toronto covers. So let's take the -5 on the Argos. Total in the game set at 52.5 points. Once again, do not trust Hamilton's defense any further than I can throw them. You got to feel like on average, every team is going to get into the 30s on them. So let's take the over here. Over 52.5 points in Toronto, Hamilton. Let's go Argos 34, Ticats 23. I imagine that we'll see some garbage time points here for the Ticats. I think this could very well be like a 30-13 or something like that, 30-16, and then they score a late touchdown or something that makes it look a little closer as a final score than it actually is. So 34-23 final. Argos win. Argos cover -5, over 52.5 points. And the last game we're going to look at is the Edmonton Elks traveling to Calgary to take on the Stampeders. Calgary coming off their bye. Edmonton not only playing their 8th straight game, but their 3rd straight on the road. I got to tell you, with all due respect to the Saskatchewan Roughriders and their defense, no team, I don't think, impressed me as much in a losing effort, maybe this season, as the Edmonton Elks last week. That is as close as it gets to a good loss. Imagine telling the Elks a year ago, hey, by the middle of next season, you're going to be competitive on the road against the best team in the league, cover +6.5 against them, and have a red zone opportunity at the end of the game to win the game outright. Not even just send it to overtime. Win the game outright. The facts are the facts. The Elks went shot for shot with the best team objectively, the best team in the league, with a chance to win the game at the end. Wildly, wildly impressive, and they did it without Trey Ford. So yeah, McLeod Bethel-Thompson gets the start in that game. He played clean. It wasn't a super effective game, but he played clean. Completed 64% of his passes, only had 200 yards passing, which is not very much, but he did have 2 touchdowns, didn't throw a pick. Kevin Brown returning to action. He bounced back in a big way. 105 rush yards on 16 carries. They had 5 receivers who each had at least 5 targets and at least 3 catches. It was literally a red zone conversion away from a huge upset here. And look, the Elks only went 2 for 5 in the red zone. So Montreal stood tall when it was the most important. But one more red zone conversion, the Elks probably win that game outright. And a massive upset. On Calgary's side, they come into this game off of their bye after back-to-back losses where the defense completely caved in, coughing up 70 points on just 699 yards. My super special efficiency mathematical mind says that's a score of 10. That's brutal. Even if you take away the 16 points that you can directly attribute in one of the Argos games to a punt return touchdown and a pick 6. Take those 16 points off the board. Okay? It's still 54 points on 699 yards, which is still like 13 point something. Just still not very good. Hasn't exactly been sunshine and rainbows on the offensive side of the ball either, as in their last 2 games, they have 6 offensive touchdowns. Tommy Stevens' goal line runs account for 4 of them. As far as I'm concerned, the only saving grace for this Stamps franchise right now is the fact that they've played very well at home. They're 4-1 at home this year. That's all 4 of their wins have been in their own building. They are one of 2 defenses league-wide allowing more than a point per minute that their defense is on the field. So what is it for Calgary? I think their defense is on the field for like 28 minutes and 10 seconds on average per game, and they're giving up like 29 points a game. A lot of the chatter around the Elks this week is that Trey Ford is going to be ready to go this week. Let's assume that he's healthy. I'm going to be bucking all the trends on this one, I think. I'm bucking the rest advantage trend. The trend of the team playing 3 straight road games, not just back-to-back, but back-to-back-to-back. We're bucking the trend of the Stamps playing well at home. You cannot rely or trust that defense. I don't think anyone can. So I'm on Edmonton in this one. I realize they're a road dog. I'm taking them. Edmonton wins this game outright. Elks go into Calgary and beat the Stamps coming off their bye. So like I say, on the line, Calgary's a, marginal home favorite, -2.5. It totally makes sense, but Edmonton, I think, is objectively the better football team right now. Give me the +2.5 on the Elks, and as I said, I'll take them to win outright. Total in the game set at 50.5 points. Yeah, it's a 5, but it's a very, 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 very low 5. So I think I got to take the over in this one. Again, can't really trust the Stamps on defense right now. So over the 50.5 points in Edmonton, Calgary. Let's go like 31-24. Could once again see, garbage time touchdown or something like that. And look, the Stamps offense is not atrocious and Edmonton's defense is not fantastic. So I think the over here is good. Competitive football game, but give me the Elks as the better team to win, cover, and give me the over on the points. Okay, so those are the picks. Let's talk a little bit more about CFL Fantasy. Once again, the game I'm sure probably unlocked as I've been recording this, but it wasn't unlocked beforehand. So here's kind of the direction I'm looking for my fantasy roster this week. At quarterback, as far as I'm concerned, there's 2 choices. If Trey Ford is playing, I'm playing Trey Ford. Trey Ford no matter what. If he's not playing, I'm probably going to shift over to Chad Kelly. Either way, I want the quarterbacks that are playing against either Hamilton or Calgary, just with the way their defenses are playing right now. So it could be a Chad Kelly week if Trey Ford's not ready to go. At running back, Brady Oliveira, league-leading rusher, why not? William Stanback, even though BC has struggled so much to put points on the board, I'm looking at kind of a yardage thing there, and Stanback is getting fed like a number one back, so why not? Kadeem Carey, I think, is probably going to be in my lineup here one way or the other, whether he's a starting back or possibly in my flex. And I might even look at whoever gets the start at running back for the Elks, whether it's Kevin Brown, whether Javon Leake is healthy and ready to come back, or even if it's Justin Rankin this week. Anybody that's in there, now they've shown that anybody can kind of be effective in this new Elks run game, so I could potentially go in any of those directions. In terms of wide receivers, Shamar Bridges has been on fire lately. Ontario Wilson has been very reliable. Curly Gittins, especially if I go Trey Ford to stack Trey Ford with Curly Gittins, who has been his most kind of voluminous and successful receiver this year. Sam Emelis, you can't argue with the targets. He's getting a ton of attention from Trevor Harris. Justin McInnes, it's tough to not have the league's leading receiver in there potentially. Or Reggie Bagleton has been one of the real bright spots for the Stamps on the offensive side this year. At flex, you know what I like to do? I like to poach touchdowns. Could be looking at like a Hergy Mayala, especially if I have Trey Ford in there. Keandre Smith has got 4 touchdowns this year. Ditto with Sean Bain or Markin Michelle. So any of those may definitely be options there to try to poach a touchdown. In terms of defenses, it's 2 options. It's either the Argos or potentially the Bombers. You might look at the Bombers in that matchup, even though, Sasky should have a really good offense. Didn't really show it last week. Might lean on the Bombers, or depending on cost, go with Toronto. There you go, folks. Those are the picks and the fantasy plays this week in Week 13 in the CFL. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the BC Lions in Touchdown Pacific beating the Ottawa REDBLACKS 27-20, laying -3.5 on the Lions. Give me the under on the 51-point total. I got the Blue Bombers beating the Roughriders in Saskatchewan in the Labor Day Classic, taking +2.5 on Winnipeg and taking the under on the 47.5-point total, 23-16 final there. I got the Toronto Argos traveling to Hamilton, beating the Ticats 34-23, laying the -5 on Toronto, taking over on the 52.5-point total. And I got the Edmonton Elks beating the Calgary Stampeders 31-24. So I'm taking +2.5 on Edmonton and over on the 50.5-point total. That's it for me, folks. Thank you so much. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. The OK Tire Labor Day weekend is now upon us. We got some great games, some awesome matchups, some year in, year out. These games always deliver. Enjoy watching the games. If you're going to Touchdown Pacific, enjoy Touchdown Pacific. Let me know how the game is. How's the atmosphere? I wonder how it compares to Touchdown Atlantic, which hopefully we get back next year. But let me know all that stuff down in the comments section below. Enjoy the games this week. We'll see you again in Week 14.